She waited 60 years to believe in love again. Sandra Harris had everything: success, wealth, independence, but she was lonely. When a charming 29-year-old man entered her life, she thought fate had finally answered her prayers. They married quietly. 2 days later, Sandra was dead. Doctors called it natural. Everyone else moved on. But something didn't add up, because the man who promised to protect her walked away untouched. And the truth behind her sudden death was far darker than anyone imagined. Stay with this story, because what happened after Sandra's death would expose a pattern no one saw coming. Subscribe now for true stories that uncover hidden evil. Like and comment to help this case reach more people. This isn't just a love story gone wrong. It's a warning. Sandra Harris had spent most of her life proving she didn't need anyone. At 60 years old, she was a symbol of discipline and success in Austin, Texas. A woman who had built her business from the ground up with nothing but determination and sleepless nights. For decades, her days began before sunrise and ended long after the city lights dimmed. Contracts, boardrooms, and strategic decisions became her world, and in that world, Sandra thrived. But ambition has a way of demanding sacrifices. While her company flourished, her marriage quietly crumbled. Long hours turned into emotional distance. Conversations became rare. Eventually, the relationship that once anchored her life dissolved completely. By the time the divorce papers were finalized, Sandra told herself she was fine. That success was enough. Yet when the noise of her career finally faded, the silence was unbearable. Retirement brought comfort, security, and freedom, but also loneliness. Sandra now lived alone in a large, immaculate home that echoed with emptiness. Holidays passed quietly. Phone calls from her adult children were infrequent and brief. Friends had families of their own, lives that moved on without her. At night, the stillness pressed in. Though she never admitted it out loud, Sandra longed for companionship. Not passion, not excitement, just someone to sit across from her at dinner. Someone to ask how her day had been. Someone to make the house feel alive again. Still, she was cautious. Life had taught Sandra hard lessons. She didn't trust easily, especially not men. And younger men? They were completely off her radar. The idea of dating someone decades younger felt embarrassing, unrealistic, even foolish. When younger men occasionally showed interest, she dismissed it instantly, assuming their intentions were never genuine. Sandra believed she was past that chapter of life. Then she met Jamal Preston. At 29, Jamal was confident, polished, and disarmingly charming. He dressed well, spoke smoothly, and carried himself with an ease that immediately set him apart. To the outside world, he looked like an ambitious young man finding his way in life. But beneath the surface was a carefully constructed illusion. Jamal had learned early that the world didn't give, it had to be taken. Over the years, he had perfected a method: identify lonely, financially secure older women, become exactly what they needed, and slowly insert himself into their lives. Sandra wasn't his first target. She was his fifth. Their paths crossed at a charity fundraiser in downtown Austin, one of the few social events Sandra still attended. She wasn't searching for romance. She wasn't even paying attention to the room. But Jamal noticed her immediately. He watched the way she smiled politely while remaining distant. The way she stood alone despite being surrounded by people. He saw the quiet loneliness in her eyes and recognized it instantly. When Jamal approached her, he didn't flirt. He didn't rush. He didn't overwhelm her. Instead, he was calm, respectful, disarming. Their conversation felt natural, almost effortless. Sandra found herself surprised by how comfortable she felt speaking with him. His attention felt sincere, his questions thoughtful. Still, she remained guarded, telling herself it was nothing more than friendly conversation. But Jamal had already begun his work. In the weeks that followed, their encounters became more frequent, never forced, always coincidental. Jamal learned everything about Sandra, her regrets, her habits, her loneliness. He listened when she spoke. He remembered small details. He made her feel seen. Late-night phone calls turned into long conversations. Thoughtful gestures followed. Books she liked, tea she loved, quiet moments that filled the empty spaces in her life. Slowly, the walls Sandra had built over decades began to crumble. What she saw was a kind, attentive man who admired her strength and independence. What Jamal saw was an opportunity closing in. And as Sandra allowed herself to believe in love again, she had no idea she was stepping directly into a trap that had already claimed 4 lives before hers. What Sandra believed was love was, in truth, a carefully staged performance. From the very beginning, Jamal Preston understood exactly what she needed and what she feared. He never rushed her. He never demanded anything. Every step forward felt like Sandra's choice, even though Jamal was quietly controlling the pace. He presented himself as a man of simple desires. Jamal spoke often about his humble past, carefully edited stories that painted him as someone who had struggled but remained honest and grounded. He avoided flashy displays, never appearing impressed by Sandra's wealth or status. Instead, he praised her wisdom, her discipline, her resilience. To Sandra, this felt different. For the first time in years, she wasn't being admired for her money or success, but for who she was. Jamal listened when she talked about her regrets, her sacrifices, and the loneliness that followed retirement. He remembered everything. He validated her feelings. He became her safe place. And slowly, Sandra began to depend on him. Jamal positioned himself as her emotional anchor. When she worried about her health, he reassured her. When she spoke about feeling disconnected from her children, he reminded her of her strength. When doubt crept in about their age difference, Jamal dismissed it gently, insisting that love didn't follow rules. Every response was perfectly timed. Once her trust was secured, Jamal shifted his focus, carefully, subtly, to her finances. He never asked for money. He never demanded control. Instead, he framed everything as concern. He suggested she simplify her life now that she was retired. He spoke about peace of mind and planning for the future. He encouraged conversations about estate planning, insurance, and long-term security, always presenting himself as a partner, never a beneficiary. Sandra didn't notice the shift at first. As the relationship deepened, Jamal spoke about commitment, about building a future together, about standing by her side for the rest of her life. With each conversation, the idea of merging their lives felt more natural. Little by little, changes were made. Jamal was added to insurance policies. Documents were adjusted. Decisions were justified as practical, responsible steps. Sandra believed she was protecting the man she loved. What she didn't know was that Jamal had done this before. For times, in city after city, under different names, Jamal had followed the same pattern. Wealthy, lonely older women. Rapid romance. Swift marriage. And then, death. Each time, the cause appeared natural. Each time, Jamal walked away as the sole beneficiary. Each time, he vanished before questions could be asked. Sandra was now the fifth. This time, Jamal's plan was even more calculated. He knew Sandra had a heart condition. He knew she relied on daily medication. And he knew that her passing could be made to look like an unfortunate progression of her illness. Behind closed doors, while playing the role of the devoted partner, Jamal began interfering with her care. He handled her medications, organized her routines, watched her health closely, not with concern, but with patience. Sandra trusted him completely. To friends and neighbors, Jamal appeared attentive and loving. He attended to her needs, accompanied her to appointments, and spoke of her with admiration. No one suspected a thing. But Jamal was already counting time. As Sandra grew more emotionally and physically dependent on him, Jamal's confidence grew. Everything was falling into place exactly as it had before. What he didn't anticipate was the one variable he hadn't accounted for. A daughter who trusted her instincts. And a truth that refused to stay buried. Jamal's proposal came suddenly, almost too suddenly. One quiet evening in San Antonio, he prepared dinner himself, setting the table with deliberate care. Candles flickered softly as Sandra sat across from him, unaware that every detail of the night had already been rehearsed in his mind. As dessert was cleared, Jamal stood, lowered himself to one knee, and asked her to be his wife. Sandra was stunned. Their relationship had moved quickly, but marriage wasn't something she had expected, at least not yet. At her age, marriage felt like a chapter she had already closed. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on her as doubts flooded her mind. She told him the truth. She spoke about her age, her health, her inability to give him children. She worried she would hold him back. Jamal responded exactly as he always did, perfectly. He told her he didn't want children. He said companionship mattered more than anything. He painted a future built on love, peace, and shared moments, insisting she was all he needed. His words erased her fears. After a long silence, Sandra agreed. The wedding was small and private, just as Jamal had suggested. A quiet chapel outside the city, attended by only a handful of Sandra's friends. Jamal claimed he had no living family, another carefully crafted lie Sandra never questioned. As she stood beside him, hand in hand, Sandra believed she was beginning the happiest chapter of her life. Jamal believed the end was finally within reach. After the ceremony, Jamal moved into Sandra's home and immediately became the image of a devoted husband. He cooked her meals, organized her daily routines, and attended closely to her health. Every morning began with gentle smiles and soft words. Every night ended with reassurances of love and commitment. Sandra felt cherished. She felt safe. What she didn't see was the precision behind every gesture. Behind the scenes, Jamal began altering her medication. Slowly, carefully, replacing what kept her stable with substances that would weaken her condition without raising suspicion. He watched closely, adjusting timing and dosage with cold patience. He wasn't rushing. He never did. 2 days after the wedding, the illusion collapsed. That evening, Sandra sat at the dining table, laughing softly as she talked about plans for their future, travel, quiet mornings, a life finally shared with someone who cared. Jamal watched her closely. Then it happened. Sandra suddenly clutched her chest. Her face drained of color as confusion and fear filled her eyes. She struggled to breathe, panic overtaking her body as she looked at Jamal for help. Jamal sprang into action, at least on the surface. He called emergency services, his voice filled with controlled urgency. He held her, whispered reassurances, and played the role flawlessly. To anyone watching, he was a desperate husband fighting to save his wife. But inside, he already knew the outcome. By the time paramedics arrived, Sandra's condition had deteriorated rapidly. On the way to the hospital, her grip on Jamal's hand weakened. Her breaths grew shallow. She never recovered. Sandra Harris was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Jamal collapsed into grief, at least convincingly enough. Doctors and nurses saw a devastated young husband who had lost his bride just days after their wedding. No one questioned him. No alarms were raised. To the world, Sandra's death appeared tragic, but natural. Another woman lost to heart failure. Another grieving husband left behind. But Jamal had made one critical mistake. He believed the story ended there. He didn't realize that Sandra's sudden death had ignited suspicion in the one person who knew her better than anyone else. Her daughter. And she was just getting started. Kira Harris had always trusted her instincts. As a police officer based in Houston, skepticism wasn't just part of her job, it was part of who she was. Growing up, she had watched her mother navigate life with discipline and precision. Sandra Harris was never careless, never impulsive, especially when it came to her health. So when Kira received the call that her mother had died just 2 days after getting married, nothing about it felt right. At the hospital, Jamal's grief seemed rehearsed. He cried at the right moments, spoke softly to doctors, held his head in his hands just long enough for others to notice. To everyone else, he looked like a devastated husband. To Kira, he looked like a man performing a role. She replayed every interaction she'd ever had with him. The vague answers about his past, the way he hovered around her mother, how quickly he had embedded himself into Sandra's life. None of it sat well with her. Officially, Sandra's death was ruled natural. Unofficially, Kira couldn't let it go. Using her professional knowledge, she requested a toxicology report, fully aware it might upset people and reopen wounds. When the results came back, her worst fears were confirmed. Sandra had died from an overdose of her heart medication. Kira knew immediately this wasn't an accident. Her mother had followed strict routines for years. She never missed doses, never doubled medication. Someone had interfered. and there was only one person who had access: Jamal. As Kira dug deeper, she discovered that Sandra had recently made changes to her estate. Jamal had been added as the beneficiary to insurance policies and financial accounts. The motive was suddenly impossible to ignore. What began as suspicion turned into obsession. Kira launched a quiet investigation into Jamal's past, and what she uncovered was chilling. Multiple names, multiple cities, multiple marriages, each wife older, each financially comfortable, each dead within months of marriage. The pattern was undeniable. Jamal Preston wasn't a grieving husband. He was a predator. Kira contacted authorities across state lines, piecing together records Jamal had tried to erase. Families of his previous wives came forward, each story mirroring her mother's fate. Rapid romance, quick marriage, sudden death. Sandra hadn't been special to him. She'd been next. As pressure mounted, Jamal sensed the walls closing in. Surveillance increased. Questions followed him. For the first time, his confidence cracked. He planned to disappear, but Kira anticipated it. Working with colleagues, she ensured Jamal was monitored closely. The night he attempted to flee, law enforcement was ready. Sirens cut through the darkness as Jamal was stopped and taken into custody, his escape thwarted. At trial, Jamal tried one last performance. He claimed love. He claimed innocence. He claimed tragedy. But evidence dismantled his lies piece by piece. Toxicology reports, financial documents, testimony from other victims' families. His aliases were read aloud in court, each one exposing another chapter of deception. The jury didn't hesitate. Jamal Preston was found guilty on multiple counts and sentenced to life in prison without parole. As he was led away, Kira finally allowed herself to breathe. Her mother's story would not end in silence. Sandra Harris would be remembered not as a victim of love, but as the reason a killer was finally stopped. And Jamal's cycle of manipulation ended where it should have long ago. Behind bars, Sandra Harris trusted love and paid the ultimate price. But her story didn't end in silence. Because one person refused to accept a lie. This case reminds us that danger doesn't always arrive with violence. Sometimes it comes with charm, with promises, with someone who looks exactly like the answer to your prayers. If this story moved you, disturbed you, or made you think twice about who you trust, don't ignore that feeling. Subscribe for more real-life stories that expose hidden truths and bring justice into the light. Like this video to help this story reach more people who need to hear it. Comment below. Do you think Jamal would have been caught if Kira hadn't trusted her instincts? Your support helps keep these stories alive, because awareness saves lives. Thank you for watching. Stay alert, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next story.